Imagine waking up to the news. The third temple has been built in Jerusalem. Crowds gather, the world watches, and history changes forever. Some call it a miracle. Others fear it's the start of something bigger. How did this happen? Who made it possible? And what does it mean for the future of Israel and the world? The answers may shock you. Watch till the end to uncover the deepest secrets behind this event. And don't forget to like and share. For thousands of years, one place has stood at the center of history, faith, and endless longing: the temple in Jerusalem. It was more than just stone walls and sacred rituals. It was the heart of an entire nation, a divine connection between heaven and earth, a symbol of unity, power, and devotion. But that heart was shattered, not once, but twice. The first temple, built by King Solomon nearly 3,000 years ago, was a marvel of ancient civilization. Its golden walls glowed under the sun, and within its chambers lay the Ark of the Covenant, believed to hold the very laws of God. It was a place of sacred offerings, deep prayers, and unshakable faith. But that faith was tested when in 586 BCE, the Babylonians marched in, torched the temple, and reduced it to ruins. The pain was unbearable. The people of Israel were sent into exile, their home destroyed, their future uncertain. Yet, in their hearts, the temple never died. 70 years later, against all odds, the second temple rose from the ashes. It was simpler at first, but later, King Herod transformed it into one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world. Pilgrims traveled from across the land to see its white stones, golden accents, and towering presence. It stood for centuries, surviving wars, rebellions, and shifting empires. But history is merciless. In 70 CE, the Roman army, led by General Titus, crushed the Jewish revolt, set fire to the Second Temple, and destroyed it completely. The sacred space that had once united an entire nation was reduced to dust and smoke. The Jewish people were scattered across the world, yet one dream never faded: the dream of rebuilding the temple. For over 2,000 years, Jewish prayers have echoed the same plea: may the temple be rebuilt in our days. The third temple is not just an architectural dream. It represents a prophecy, a promise, and a future that could redefine history itself. Some believe that rebuilding the temple will bring peace, unity, and the long-awaited Messianic age. Others fear it could ignite religious and political chaos, shaking the balance of power in the Middle East. The Temple Mount, one of the holiest yet most contested places on earth, already holds the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, sacred to 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. Any attempt to rebuild the temple could spark reactions far beyond Israel's borders. Throughout history, there have been whispers, plans, and even serious efforts to rebuild the temple. Some have tried in secret, while others have openly campaigned for its return. In 363 CE, Roman Emperor Julian attempted to restore the temple, but mysterious disasters halted the project. In modern times, organizations like the Temple Institute in Israel have already prepared blueprints, sacred vessels, and even garments for the high priests. But the question remains: who will finally take the first step? And what happens if they do? Could Donald Trump, a leader who has already reshaped Jerusalem's status on the global stage, be the man who sets history in motion? Could we be standing on the edge of an event that will change everything? One thing is certain: if the third temple rises, the world will never be the same again. For centuries, the dream of rebuilding the third temple has felt distant, a longing buried in ancient prophecies, whispered in prayers, and etched into the hopes of millions. Yet, history has a strange way of shifting when the world least expects it. And in 2017, a moment arrived that sent shockwaves through history: Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. It wasn't just another political move. It was a decision that defied decades of diplomatic caution, challenged global norms, and reignited a conversation that had long been considered untouchable. For some, Trump was simply a bold leader making a logical move. But for others, especially prophecy believers, this was something much deeper, a sign that the pieces of an ancient puzzle were finally falling into place. Trump didn't just recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he acted. In May 2018, the U.S. Embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something that had been promised by past presidents but never fulfilled. It was a symbolic yet monumental shift in global politics, sending a clear message. Jerusalem's status was no longer up for debate. The reactions were immediate. Outrage, celebration, protests, and deep divisions erupted across the world. But within Israel, something else happened. A growing belief that history was accelerating. Then came the Abraham Accords, historic agreements between Israel and Arab nations like the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. For decades, the idea of peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors had seemed impossible. Yet, here it was, happening in real time, under Trump's leadership. For prophecy watchers, it was another step toward a prophesied future. In Jewish and Christian eschatology, the rebuilding of the Third Temple is tied to global peace efforts, alliances, and shifting political landscapes. Was this, they wondered, a divine setup? Trump's presidency sparked a strange and powerful narrative among religious communities. Some saw him as a modern-day Cyrus, a ruler who, like the ancient Persian king, would pave the way for Israel's restoration. Others believed his role was more direct, that he was unknowingly setting the stage for the construction of the Third Temple. But could he really be the one to make the impossible happen? While Trump himself never publicly spoke about the Third Temple, many of his most passionate supporters did. In Jerusalem, Jewish and Christian organizations dedicated to temple restoration began seeing his actions as divinely inspired. Some even minted coins with Trump's face alongside King Cyrus, symbolizing his role in biblical history. The Temple Institute, an organization actively preparing for the Third Temple, saw his presidency as a unique window of opportunity. The geopolitical climate was shifting. Alliances were being formed, and for the first time in decades, a U.S. leader had unapologetically sided with Israel's religious and historical claims. The question remained, would Trump, or someone influenced by his legacy, be the one to finally lay the foundation stone of the Third Temple? Prophecies, politics, power. They have always danced together in history. Trump's decisions did not build the Third Temple, but they undeniably shook the foundations of what was once considered impossible. The stage has been set, and whether in 10 years or 50, the question is no longer if, but when. The world has already seen how a single leader can reshape history with one decision. Could the next move be the one that changes everything? And if the Third Temple rises, will it be the beginning of a new golden age, or the spark of a global storm? The answer? Perhaps history is already in motion. For years, the idea of rebuilding the Third Temple remained just that, an idea, a dream whispered in prayers and debated in quiet corners of power. Until one day, something happened. Something so massive that the world could no longer look away. A single event. A moment so powerful that it shattered hesitation, forced decisions, and set history on an irreversible path. It all began on an ordinary morning in Jerusalem. The sun rose over the Temple Mount, casting golden light over the ancient stones. The air felt different, charged, as if the city itself was holding its breath. A global broadcast, reports flashing across every screen. And in that moment, the world changed forever. Some say it was a political breakthrough, an unprecedented agreement that shifted the entire Middle East's balance. Others believe it was a religious awakening, an undeniable sign that the time had come. But the cause didn't matter. What mattered was the reaction. Within hours, the streets of Jerusalem filled with thousands. Some were celebrating, dancing, singing, crying with joy. Others watched in stunned silence, their minds racing toward the implications. Because now there was no turning back. Within minutes, reactions flooded in from every corner of the planet. In Israel, the government faced the most difficult decision in modern history. Would they embrace the momentum and seize the moment? Or would they hesitate, fearing the consequences? The Knesset held an emergency meeting. Religious leaders, military officials, and global diplomats scrambled to understand the full weight of what was about to happen. Across the ocean, in Washington, D.C., world leaders gathered for urgent discussions. Could they support such a move? Would they stop it? Or had history already made the decision for them? Nations divided. Some declared their unwavering support, calling it a prophetic moment, a long-awaited justice for Israel. Others condemned it, warning of global instability, unrest, and even war. And in the streets, the people held their breath, because whether they welcomed it or feared it, they all knew one thing: history was about to be rewritten. As the world reeled, religious communities faced their own moment of reckoning. For many Jews, this was a miracle generations had prayed for, the chance to restore something holy, powerful, and deeply tied to their identity. For Christians, reactions were split. Some saw this as the fulfillment of prophecy, the final sign before the Messiah's return. Others feared the consequences, questioning whether this event would bring salvation or destruction. For Muslims, this was a moment of profound concern. The Temple Mount is home to Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. What would happen to it? What would this mean for the sacred balance of Jerusalem? The world watched, some with hope, some with fear. But no one could look away, because the truth was clear. The Third Temple was no longer a distant dream. It was happening, and nothing would ever be the same again. The air in Jerusalem was electric. Something unthinkable was happening, something that had only existed in ancient texts and whispered prophecies. The decision had been made. The Third Temple would be built. The world was watching, waiting, and reacting, some with unshakable faith, others with uncontrollable fear. Because this wasn't just about constructing a building, it was about reshaping history itself. On a clear morning, under the gaze of thousands gathered at the Temple Mount, the first stone was laid. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in protest. Tears flowed freely, some of joy, some of sorrow. For the believers, this was the moment they had prayed for across generations, a sign that the Messianic age was near, that redemption was unfolding before their very eyes. For others, it was a warning of what was to come. Across the world, news channels broadcasted the historic event. Reporters described it as the most significant religious construction of the modern era. But behind the scenes, the real battles were just beginning. Money poured in from passionate supporters across the globe. Billionaire donors, religious organizations, and powerful backers saw this as a divine mission. Construction companies, architects, and scholars came together, carefully studying ancient blueprints to ensure that the temple was rebuilt exactly as it was described in Scripture. But opposition rose just as quickly. World leaders debated. Was this a new era of peace or a spark for chaos? Some countries immediately declared their support. Others warned that the region was on the edge of collapse. And then there was the biggest question of all, the Temple Mount itself. The Temple Mount was already home to Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, two of the holiest sites in Islam. The Muslim world erupted in protest, outrage, and fear. Could the temple be built without disturbing these sacred sites? Or was this the beginning of a conflict far greater than anyone could have imagined? Tensions soared. Some called for negotiation, compromise, and diplomacy. Others saw this as an act of provocation, a threat to the balance of the region. And yet, despite the chaos, construction continued. Because those behind the temple's rise believed something far greater was at play. A destiny written long before modern borders, politics, and conflicts. Every day the structure rose higher. Every stone, every wall, every detail reflected ancient descriptions, sacred texts, and divine instructions. And as the final stages of construction neared, one question gripped the world. Would this temple bring a golden age of peace? Or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous, something no one was ready for? Because once the third temple stood tall in Jerusalem, there was no going back. History had already changed. The third temple now stood in Jerusalem, an unshakable reality that sent ripples across the world. It was supposed to be a moment of divine triumph, a fulfillment of ancient prophecies, a beacon of faith that would unite believers in a new era of spiritual awakening. But instead, it became the most controversial event in modern history. The celebrations in Jerusalem had barely ended before the world's power structures began to shift. Some called it a miracle, others a provocation. But one thing was undeniable. History had just taken a path with no return. For many, the construction of the Third Temple was a long-awaited dream turned into reality. Pilgrims from around the world flooded into Jerusalem, desperate to see the sacred structure with their own eyes. Prayers, offerings, and religious ceremonies once thought to belong only in the past returned in full force, filling the air with a sense of awe and destiny. But outside of Israel, the reactions were far from unified. In Washington, London, and Brussels, world leaders held emergency meetings. They spoke in urgent, hushed tones, knowing that this moment had the power to reshape alliances, ignite conflicts, or even bring about an age of peace. Some nations openly celebrated, recognizing Israel's sovereign right to rebuild what was once lost. Others issued harsh condemnations, calling it a dangerous escalation that threatened the fragile balance of the Middle East. And then there were those who feared the consequences beyond politics. Those who believed that the Third Temple was not just a building, but a signal. A signal that the world was moving toward something irreversible. Across the globe, religious communities struggled to process what had just happened. For Jews, it was the fulfillment of a promise thousands of years old. But even among them, debates raged. Was this truly the will of God? Or had mankind forced fate's hand? For Christians, interpretations varied. Some saw the temple as a divine sign of the Messiah's return, while others feared it signaled the end of days, the final battle between good and evil. For Muslims, the construction of the temple on the holiest site of Islam was nothing short of an outrage. Protests erupted. Leaders issued threats, and millions feared that this act would push the region into a war that no one could stop. The temple had been built, but at what cost? The economy, the markets, and the rise of the unknown. As tensions soared, the global economy reacted like a storm-tossed sea. Oil prices surged, stock markets trembled, and investors watched with wide eyes as nations scrambled to reposition themselves in this new era. Some believed that the temple's construction would usher in an age of wealth and prosperity, while others feared economic collapse driven by conflict and instability. Unexplained events, strange occurrences, ancient texts resurfacing. Had something been unlocked? Had history been rewritten in a way no one was prepared for? The world had crossed a threshold, and whether it was leading toward a golden age or a storm beyond imagination, no one could say. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The Third Temple stands tall in Jerusalem, its golden glow reflecting the hopes and fears of an entire world. The chants of worshippers echo through the city, their voices rising like a tide, some filled with awe and faith, others trembling with uncertainty and dread. This was supposed to be a moment of divine completion, a fulfillment of something written in the stars long before our time. And yet, it feels like only the beginning. The world watches, holding its breath. Has this sacred construction brought us closer to peace, or to a storm we never saw coming? Some say this was always destiny, that history had been waiting for this moment to unfold. Others fear that human hands have forced something that was meant to stay untouched. Will the Third Temple become a bridge to unity, bringing together people of all faiths in an era of harmony and spiritual rebirth? Or is this the first spark of a fire that will burn across the nations, igniting conflicts that no one can control? One thing is certain: we have stepped into a new age, an age unlike any before. Was this the dawn of a prophecy? Or the first step toward something we cannot undo? If you want to know more about the mysteries shaping our world, subscribe now. Like this video if it made you think. Watch till the end. You won't believe what comes next, because sometimes the answers we seek are just the beginning of more questions.